Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I want to highlight a couple things as we get started. As attendees at today's webinar, your camera will be turned off and everyone will be muted. If you do have questions during the presentation, we ask that you use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can enter questions there. We are going to reserve time for a Q&A session following the main conversation, and we'll address questions at that time. We're going to record this and make the presentation available when it's ready, typically by next week. If you do hear or see something from our panelists today that you'd like more information about, feel free to send us an email and we can set up a one-on-one call to discuss more. A really important piece, this is not a sales pitch for Axiom Cloud, RMS, or CB Spaceline. Our goal is to raise awareness of the new refrigerant regulations in New York and address the biggest questions that we have all been receiving from various industry stakeholders. This is an opportunity to have an industry conversation about a highly relevant and urgent topic. And as Keilly just mentioned, this may be one of the first webinars or discussions on this particular topic, given how timely and fast-changing it is. If you only take away one thing from today's discussion, it should be this. Refrigerant regulations are here at the international, federal, and state level. They're getting more stringent over time. Don't wait to define your refrigerant compliance strategy. Otherwise, you're putting yourself, your company, and your shareholders at risk of penalties, fines, enforcement actions, etc. On the flip side, the financial, compliance, operational, and sustainable benefits of better refrigerant management practices are enormous. So, there's a really big carrot here, and there's also a really big stick. And it's just important that we're all super aware of what's happening. So in terms of quick intros, my name is Amrit. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Axiom Cloud. I've been helping grocery chains and large commercial refrigerated facilities optimize their refrigeration for, I guess, about 12 years now. Refrigeration is a massive climate opportunity, financial opportunity. It's a really large, overlooked, and underserved category. Our mission at Axiom is to solve the biggest problems plaguing the commercial refrigeration space using software, AI, and automation. I am really excited about our early leak detection module because of the massive climate potential that it has in the space. Across the approximately 800 sites where it's already deployed today, this module has proven it can increase our Axiom Cloud's greenhouse gas impact by more than 10x compared to energy savings alone, which is incredibly motivating to me and the Axiom team. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm excited to partner with large grocery and cold storage companies to deploy these types of solutions in thousands of facilities fast so we can realize these climate and financial benefits at scale. So next up, Keilly, do you want to give a quick self-intro?
Sure. My name is Keilly Witman. I'm the head of the Refrigerant Management Solutions Group at DC Engineering. We work with food retailers and other refrigerant end users to help them understand compliance and manage their compliance, adopt refrigerant management best practices, and transition to environmentally friendlier refrigerants. If it has to do with refrigerant management and food retailers, we pretty much do it all. We're a small team, just 9 people. I'm excited to be here to talk about New York State regulations.
Thanks, Keilly. And Tom, you want to do an intro?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Tom Matthews. I've been in the industry since the early 1980s. I have a small company, engineering company. We do refrigeration and HVAC related design engineering, commissioning, site evaluations, and troubleshooting around the world for some of the biggest retailers in the world. And I'm excited to be part of this because I've been in this industry for 40 years and it hasn't changed much. That's one of the most disturbing things for me. And Axiom Cloud and companies that will develop services with using similar methods to Axiom, they're where we need to go. I'm tired of being in the 1980s every time I go to work. So I'm looking forward to this webinar and to some stirring questions from the audience.
Awesome. Yeah, ask Tom some leading questions. I'm sure he could take us on some interesting journeys. So in terms of today's agenda, we're going to keep this pretty simple with questions. So does the AIM Act apply to my facilities? And let's talk about the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. Do I need to worry about state regulations? What's happening in New York? What are the deadlines? I already have leak sensors in my facilities. Is that enough? Why should refrigerant management be a priority for me in 2025? Then how do I build a business case for refrigerant regulatory compliance in 2025 if my budget has already been set for weeks or months? And then we're going to leave as much time as we can for Q&A. So with that, let's jump right in here. Starting with, does the AIM Act apply to my facilities? And we are going to talk about Trump on the next slide, I promise. So Keilly, do you want to talk through this one?
Sure. Yeah, if you are in food retail, the AIM Act applies to your facilities. And there are 3 parts to the AIM Act. One of them we're very, very familiar with. We've been through it several times already. It's the phase down of HFC refrigerants. It works a little bit differently under the AIM Act, which is pretty important to understand. That's not the topic to get into today, but it's worth its own webinar. There's the technology transitions regulations, which have already gone into effect as of January 1st, 2025. That's new in terms of EPA regulations. And that's certainly a doozy. And unfortunately, I don't think most people are ready for that, or were not ready for it when it already went into effect. The third part is, I think, going to be more of a topic today. It's the part that overlaps a little bit with New York State regulations. It corresponds to subsection H of the AIM Act, and it's called the Emissions Reduction and Reclamation Regulations. It's the corresponding regulation for HFCs to section 608 for HCFCs, right? So most of it is very, very familiar. It basically extends a lot of the same requirements that we've been under since the early 1990s and just applies them to HFCs and HFC substitute refrigerants that have GWPs greater than 53. The big thing that's different is that it does drop the compliance threshold down to 15 pounds, 1.5. I've learned very recently that it's very easy to misunderstand 15 and 50. So I'm spelling it out 1.5 instead of 50. And that, for the most part, that goes into effect on January 1st, 2026. But there's a lot that you need to do to get ready for January 1st, 2026. So if you're not already thinking about that and acting on those requirements, you're already way behind. So that is a really big deal. So I think that leads us right into the next slide, which is about, okay, I'm sure you guys have heard that a couple people have introduced a resolution to rescind that Part H regulation, the emissions reduction and reclamation regulations. Just to be very, very clear, the first 2 parts of the regulations are final. They have been on the books too long. They are in there, and that is not what this is about, right? So this resolution just has to do with the emissions reduction and reclamation regulations. Technology transitions rule has nothing to do with this, and neither does the phase down. What this is it's a request for Congress to consider to rescind the emissions reduction and reclamation regulations that were developed under the AIM Act. This is going to be interesting to see what happens here. I know an awful lot of people just think, oh yes, under Trump, this is going to go away. Don't forget that the AIM Act came into effect because of Republicans, House representatives, and senators, right? This is a Jobs Act. This was done with lobbying from an awful lot of stakeholders in our industry. There are an awful lot of proponents out there. It's a very scary thought to them that this is rescinded, because if it is rescinded, no one ever for the entire future, for the next 1,000 years, can ever introduce anything similar, right? So all the reclaimers that are in favor of this, all the refrigerant manufacturers in favor of it, all the stakeholders that are in favor of with it, they're out there talking to their congressmen and their senators to try to save this. So it's not a no-brainer that this is going to go away. There's a lot of people out there fighting for it. And if this process is a long one, it can be stretched out for a really long time. We know Congress is not famous for action. So do not wait to get ready for this until this becomes clear, right? It's uncertain enough. You should be focusing on getting ready for it. I'm not sure this is going to go through. It's not looking very good in terms of this being rescinded. Don't get yourself in a jam by not starting to get ready for it. Everything you have to do to get ready for this is just good refrigerant management anyway, right? So don't look at it as getting ready for compliance with this. Look at it as getting your house in order and doing things that you should be doing anyway. Okay.
Thanks, Keilly.
Sure.
Yeah, so just putting a finer point on this, the AIM Act was co-sponsored by 34 senators, half of which were Republicans. President Trump signed this into law in 2020. It does have broad industry support from the key trade organizations, from almost all the big gas suppliers like Honeywell, and then the big refrigeration OEMs as well. A couple other really important pieces: the EPA can reach back 3 or more years, assuming the legislation does stand, even if Trump chooses not to enforce it. The next administration very well could be different than Trump and may choose to exercise this ability to reach back in time and enforce things that happened during the Trump years. Putting all that aside, assuming that all the federal stuff disappears entirely, there's still the question of the states. There are now 20 states that are pursuing similar regulations, in many ways, copying and pasting the AIM Act into their own books in broadly, of course, with a lot of nuance. And basically, California has already done it. New York just did it January 9th. We're going to talk more about that on the next slide here. And so this is coming. It's here. Anyone who operates any facilities in any of these states is going to have to deal with now a patchwork of regulations in case the AIM Act doesn't end up working out. And yeah, again, it's just not a risk that's worth taking for yourselves, for your companies, for your shareholders at this point. And also the benefits are just massive of doing something right now. So
don't forget Washington. Sorry, you mentioned California, New York. Don't forget Washington. There are many of you that are reporting for the first time under the Washington state regulations right now.
Yep.
I want to emphasize what Keilly said earlier about doing things which the industry should have been doing all along. And as you're mentioning, the financial incentives, because the cost of refrigerant has become so high, there's many reasons to do these things, whether any regulation went into place, and many regulations are going in place, but the financial incentives, because of the high price of refrigerant, and which will persist, and the leakiness of the industry in its current state, should drive a lot of the activities that may or may not end up as regulations over the next few years.
Yeah, well put, Tom. So looking at the patchwork of states here, my computer works. Let's go. Slide 6. Okay. So in terms of state regulations, Keilly, any particular thoughts on this? Have we already covered it enough, do you think?
I think we covered this enough. I think this is from the NASRC, right? They have a wonderful HFC hub that tracks all of the refrigerant activities on the state level as well as the federal level. If you have not checked that out yet, you should. All of these states that have a color, on there, they have committed in some way, shape, or form to developing refrigerant regulations. Some of them got ahead of the game and they, put refrigerant regulations on the book and started developing them during the first Trump administration. And then some of them pulled back when the Biden administration came into power because they wanted to see what the Biden administration did, right? And now, first thing Trump did in terms of climate change was he, dropped us out of the International Paris Agreement, things like that. That's what led these guys to want to start regulating refrigerants in the first place. I'm assuming they're all just opening up that desk drawer and picking up right where they left off, right? And they're all thinking about this again. So they're all up for grabs, and nothing stops any of the others from jumping on board too.
Tom, how do you advise your clients to deal with this patchwork of state-by-state regulations?
For most part, our clients are in the Northeast, which most of the states are heading for substantial regulation. So I just hammer on them continuously. Do the damn right thing for yourselves, and you'll be 90% through the regulations. And the fact that in many instances, clients are not even recording properly under the current regulations where they've had leaks and how the leaks were repaired. A lot of the work we're doing and the software that we're developing is just to meet those regulations. The key is make it easy for the techs to do the right thing. And those are the tools that we need to be presenting to the industry. If it's easy to do the right thing, it will get done. If it's hard to do, it will not get done. So knowing that that refrigerant is leaking in a store, whether or not a sniffers announce it, that's the first thing that needs to be easy and needs to be done. But then properly recording and reporting the leak activities, how things were concluded. That's an area where software improvements need to be made as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Frank, I just saw you raise your hand. I didn't catch you in time, so feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A, and we'll definitely get to it in a little bit here. All right, let's talk about New York. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. So I guess right off the bat, there was an update on February 3rd. So what I'm showing on the screen, what we're showing on the screen right now is kind of the text and the key takeaways from the New York regulation that was announced on January 9th. And then this is also encompassing the delay that was announced on February 3rd. So I wanted to be very upfront about that. And so, I'm going to quickly give an overview here and then let Keilly add commentary. She's more of an expert than I am here. So immediately, any system that uses 200 pounds or more of refrigerant must begin quarterly leak inspections or monthly for systems with over 1,500 pounds. If a whole system, automatic leak detection system, is installed, you don't need to do these inspections. And we're going to talk more about this in the next slide here, but these sensor-based gas detectors, such as the multi-channel sniffers or the point sensors, are not sufficient. Those do not offset the need for manual leak inspections, according to the text of this New York regulation. Also immediately, on January 9th, 2025, leaks must be repaired within 14 days of initial detection. So no more sitting on leaks, no more sawtooth graphs of refilling and not solving the initial problem. And if this is not adhered to, the government now can force grocers or cold storage folks to retrofit or shut down their systems within 6 months. So this is where the hammer comes in. Not fun. You don't want to be in this situation. By June 1st of 2025, whole system automatic leak detection systems must be installed on all systems with over 1,500 pounds of refrigerant. And they have lowered the threshold, the GWP threshold, so low that this is almost universal unless you're using CO2. Keilly, am I getting that right? Isn't the threshold like 10 or something, GWP of 10?
Most of them is a GWP 20 of 10, but that's a we could spend a whole slide on that. Okay, better to just move on, honestly.
Another really important piece. So we did a webinar with the TrackRev folks last year, and they were helping us to really deeply understand the nuances here of why equipment labeling and registration and just asset inventory is so incredibly important as a foundational step. And New York agrees. So they're requiring this by June 1st of 2025 for all systems with 1,500 pounds of HFCs. This is one that Keilly added to the list as well. Keilly, do you want to speak to this last one about submitting a transition plan?
Yeah, so everything that is above number 5 is part of the New York State's refrigerant management program. Number 5 here is part of the supermarket refrigerant program, which basically states that any system with 200 pounds of refrigerant or more has to use a refrigerant with a 20-year GWP less than 10 by the year 2035. So that's a really, really big deal for supermarkets. New York State, so there's a lot that is very unclear about these regulations. In fact, we have a list of about 3 pages of questions. We're trying to get a meeting with New York State to go over all of them. But you can get a 5-year extension on that deadline of 2035. But if you want to do that, you have to submit a transition plan prior to January 1st, 2027. So we're working with an awful lot of people to develop those transition plans because frankly, who knows what you need by 2035, right? You might think right now that you're ahead of schedule, but who knows what happens. So that supermarket refrigerant program that mandates that you convert your existing systems basically to natural refrigerants is probably the most aggressive refrigerant regulation, not just in the United States, it's the most aggressive that I know of in the world. So that is something to really put at the forefront of your radar. 4 different actually regulatory programs under the New York State regulations. Again, 1 through 4 as part of their refrigerant management program. Number 5 as part of the supermarket. I call it the supermarket transition program. So watch out for that. There's also the bulk refrigerant ban. That's what New York State now has pushed out enforcement of a little bit. That was causing quite a lot of havoc when it went into effect on January 9th of this year. Make sure you're aware of how that changed because that gives you a lot of time to get ready and stock up on the refrigerant that you need. And then there are just refrigerant bans similar, but not exactly the same as the bans under the technology transitions regulations. So a lot to process with New York State.
Yes, absolutely. Another really important nuance here is New York has made it clear in the regulation that there is a quota on how many of these transition plans they are willing to accept. So in other words, you are now in competition with the other folks in New York for who can submit their transition plans and get those accepted first, because not everyone, they will not accept 100% of market participants' transition plans. I think they cap it at 70%. And so that means if you're if 70% of folks have already submitted a plan, it's already gotten accepted, then you no longer have the ability to submit your own transition plan to get it accepted. So that's what makes this more of a 2025 item and less of a 2026 item. And, from our standpoint, the bottom line here today is that, the firing gun the starting gun has fired at this point. New York operators need to make these changes now to their leak inspection and repair practices to remain compliant. And major rollouts of automatic leak detection systems must be completed in the coming months. It's not an option anymore. And again, all we're showing on this slide are the 2025 requirements and recommendations. We're completely ignoring the 2026 and 2027 requirements and recommendations here. We're just trying to stay focused on what needs to happen right now. So this is a really key question that we run into a lot. I already have leak sensors installed in my facilities. Is that enough? Am I covered? Am I already compliant? And so I want to start by reminding folks this is not an advertisement for Axiom or anyone else here, but we do need to dispel this myth. Leak sensors, hardware-based leak sensors, provide enormous value. They provide, especially for life safety, for fast detection of major leaks, and also for precisely locating where a leak is occurring. However, leak sensors, by definition, do not provide 100% coverage. And the New York regulation is pretty darn clear that automatic leak detection systems must cover the entirety of the regulated systems. The way that I think there's multiple ways to read that. There is perhaps the most liberal or the most flexible way to read it is that if you don't have sensor, or if you're relying on sensor-based leak detection, automatic leak detection, you still need to complete manual leak inspections. There's another way to read that, which is, these sensor-based leak detectors are not sufficient to meet any of the parts of the regulation, but I'm not really sure if I agree with that interpretation. Because I think it does add an enormous amount of value from a business standpoint, and I think it also would be accepted by the regulators for certain parts of the regulation, but it's very, very clear that it does not eliminate the need for manual leak inspections, which are required on either a monthly or a quarterly basis. Also, I mean, you got to remember that if you don't already have these leak sensors, then it takes a long time to install these. This is a massive project management effort to install these across many sites. We're talking about, putting the leak detectors in one or more of these big central systems and then running, hundreds of yards or, miles of capillary tubing throughout your facility if it's a multi-channel system, for example, or many, many point sensors. And these are very expensive as well. So there's no denying, and that there's a lot of hardware cost, there's a lot of engineering cost, there's a lot of installation, then there's ongoing software maintenance, calibration, cleaning, et cetera, that goes with these hardware systems. When we're looking at a software-based whole system leak detection system, that's where we're able to immediately eliminate the need for manual inspections, according to the text of the regulation. We can fully remotely deploy this to many, many sites very quickly without physical site visits. And the cost is just a lot lower. In fact, in many cases, the cost is lower than the cost of performing manual leak inspections. And we're going to talk more about the business case in a few slides here. Tom, sensor-based leak detection does have a lot of value, and it has a place in the industry. And I'm assuming that you're still recommending some of that for your clients. Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah, I'm for a long time. I've worked for companies that sold sensor-based systems, Emerson in particular, and these systems certainly make a lot of sense. And where they're installed, they should be preserved and correctly maintained. But I've been working on software-based systems to detect refrigerant loss, I call it, as well for a number of years, precisely because the sniffers, as we call them, can't sniff every place in the store, and sometimes leaks, either major or minor, occur, and you'd rather find them before the receiver is empty and the system is struggling to maintain temperature. And software-based whole system can do that. My own company, Baseline, has worked on this several times and not been clever enough to actually get a working system. You folks have a working system. There are probably a few more out there, and they're going to need to go in again for financial reasons. Never mind the regulatory part, just the cost of emptying a receiver when that was unnecessary. You had a 2-pound leak on an underground line. The sniffer didn't sniff it. So there was no loss detection system, refrigerant loss detection, leak detection, it's also called, and you lost the whole receiver before you were aware of that leak. That can't happen anymore. That's the way we've run things for as long as I've been in the industry, and it simply has to stop.
Keilly, can you comment on the New York regulations and what they say about using whole system versus the sensor-based?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different interpretation than you. If you just read the plain language of the regulation, it seems to imply that where an automatic leak detection system is required, now keep in mind that's only appliances with 1,500 pounds or more, right? They're the only ones that are required under the New York State regulations. It says that in that particular situation, a system must be used that monitors the entire system. So I don't know how it's possible for a sensor-based system to meet that requirement. Now, I don't know whether that is what New York State intended. I tend to think they might not have even realized what they were writing, because it's unusual for a government to give a monopoly to one particular kind of manufacturer of equipment, but that's what it says, right? So to me, it reads that in that particular situation where you have an appliance with more than 1,500 pounds of refrigerant, where you must have an automatic leak detection system, it says that that system must be one that monitors the entire system. So, you know, I mean,
yeah, I guess we got to talk to the regulators and understand what they're
exactly. It's one of the things on those, you know, the 3 pages of questions that we have. Whether they knew what they were writing or not, right? They don't get to just say, "Oh, that's not what we meant," right? What counts is what is in the regulation. So, my advice is, you know, follow the regulation, right? Follow what's written there. So I'd err on the side of you know, being cautious there, and unless we can get somehow in writing from New York State that you know they would have to kind of go on record and say that, hey, you know, any type of automatic leak detection system is okay for those 1,500 pounds or more.
Yeah.
We'll see where they wind up.
My own opinion is that somebody writing the regulations knew enough to understand the limitations of sniffers and put this additional language in to make sure that the entire system was watched carefully. They probably didn't know exactly what that would take, but I'm quite sure they knew sniffers couldn't do the full job, because everybody's known that in the industry for years. And this incorporation of additional requirements just makes sense if you know the business at all.
Yeah. I mean, what I've heard, and this is opinions from other folks in the space, this is not, you know, based on conversations with regulators, is that this is a direct response to what happened in California. There was this kind of unforeseen outcome, which was that folks figured out how to comply with the California regulation by installing a single point sensor in the machine room and some other life safety sensors in the walk-ins, you know, the single point gas sensors. And that did, I believe, technically achieve the CARB requirements in California, but obviously completely missed the overall intent of those regulations, because it just does not achieve the goal of reducing leaks substantially. It's more about life safety when you install it in that fashion. And so my understanding, you know, based on opinions from folks that I've spoken to in the industry, are that this New York regulation is a direct answer to that, to make sure they're closing that loophole, which has really plagued California now for a long time. Of course, the regulators have the final word, not us. So with that, let's keep on going here. So why should refrigerant management be a priority for my retail, grocery, or cold storage company in 2025? So we've talked a lot about the stick, about the penalties, the cost, the problems, you know, if you avoid this. Now let's talk about, you know, some of the opportunity here. There's just such a massive opportunity and a business case to be had as well. The whole purpose of retail grocery is to sell groceries. When cooling is out, that becomes really hard. And leaks are a major reason that cooling goes out. So, you know, let's have fewer leaks, which lead to fewer business continuity and business interruptions. From a cost standpoint, you look at the business case for avoiding one single leak. That can be worth $15,000 to your bottom line. That can put your entire facility, your entire building into the red for the month. And that's ignoring the lost sales and the shrink. That's just looking at the gas and the technician time. From a sustainability standpoint, you know, you leak 2 pounds of this of 404A, that has the same impact as driving your car for a year from a greenhouse gas standpoint. It's just unbelievably potent greenhouse gas, and it leaks at very high quantities. And chief sustainability officers are, I think, really beginning to understand the opportunity that exists here to dramatically change the emission profile of their entire enterprise organization just by looking at this one source of emissions, refrigerant leaks. And then obviously we've talked a lot about compliance. You know, this is being cracked down on at the federal level, at the state level, in Europe and Australia, all around the world. We'll talk a little bit more about consent decrees, but basically a consent decree is when the government holds a penalty over your head and forces you to take a bunch of actions that you otherwise may not have taken voluntarily in exchange for waiving that penalty. Keilly, did I get that right?
Yeah, that's very simply stated. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. It's a gift and a curse.
It forces you to do the right thing much faster than you otherwise might.
Well, what they consider to be the right thing, right?
Yes.
When I was at the EPA, unfortunately, these cases take about 5 years. There's one particular case that when the case began and they began to develop the consent decree, the state of the art refrigeration technology was secondary loop glycol. By the time the consent decree came out, that was no longer considered to be state of the art, but in the consent decree, it stated that all new systems had to be secondary loop glycol, right? So
Well,
basically, the curse part of it is you've turned your refrigerant decisions over to the EPA and you're stuck with them for 3 years. The
yeah.
blessing part of it is in exchange, they decrease your fines by several $1,000,000. So best not to even get into that situation.
Well put. Okay, so let's talk about the fun part here. So how do I build a business case for refrigerant regulatory compliance if my budget is already set for this year? The answer is build a business case that's too compelling to ignore. That is going to be, you go to your CFO and you show them this business case, and rather than them being annoyed with you or angry for asking for money, they should be excited but that and happy that you brought them this opportunity. And so we're going to break this down a little bit here, but breaking this into just a few constituent components here. The first one is avoiding required quarterly or monthly manual leak inspections. This is not just a source of savings. This is a source of avoided costs. You can literally look at the budget, look at your line items, and you can remove this line item for leak inspections. Quarterly for 200 pounds of HFCs, monthly for systems with over 1,500 pounds of HFCs. Keilly, so I quoted you here, or we quoted you here. Do you want to talk about this quote?
Um, yeah. So this is a so this is an analysis. It's not actually very easy to just quickly talk about this, but if you basically take the requirement that's in the federal requirement and a lot of the state requirements, that there are different triggers, for instance, for a large rack system, that you get into a situation where you have to conduct quarterly in-person leak inspections, right? So if you take, let's say conservatively, a cost for those of about, $1,000, and you perform those every quarter, and that's, just for one, right? The number of appliances that are going to trigger this federal requirement to do regular quarterly inspections when the AIM Act regulations go into effect for HFCs, suddenly companies are going to have to do thousands of these every quarter or every year, right? So you multiply the cost of those versus the cost to install a full system automatic leak detection monitor, and you can either put a couple $1,000,000 in your budget to perform those mandatory inspections that you're going to have to perform, or you can finance these whole system leak detection systems, right? And that's not even taking into consideration whether anybody ever finds a leak. It's basically just the cost of performing the in-person inspections versus the cost of paying for those full system leak detection systems, because the sniffer-based systems do not exempt you from performing those in-person inspections, right? Because those sniffer-based systems, you're only exempt from inspecting the parts of the appliance that are continuously monitored by those sniffer-based systems. So you still have to send somebody out there to inspect the parts of the appliance that are not continuously monitored, right? So I'm trying to write an article about this. I'm trying to find time to kind of go into the full financial analysis, but I don't think most people realize yet that when the AIM Act regulations are expanded to cover all their HFC appliances, how many appliances leak enough refrigerant that it exceeds the leak rate that triggers these leak inspections, right? I mean, the average leak rate for an appliance is 25%. So if that's the average, do 50% of your appliances exceed that leak rate? Do 10%? What is it? How many appliances do you have? multiply 10%, 20% by that, then multiply that by 4,000, conservatively speaking, every year. So that's, this is where I wish I had a whiteboard, right, to map it out. But it's a very simple financial calculation. And at the latest, people are going to realize when they start paying for those in-person inspections in 2026, how much that's going to add to their budget.
And this avoided cost is even more salient in New York because the requirements related to manual leak inspections are kind of even more stringent. Another really interesting thing that we've run into is, when we ask our customers, for example, what is the avoided cost of eliminating these manual leak inspections? It's really interesting because our customers who are already doing them, they go to their vendors and they try to take them out of scope, and the vendors tell them, oh, this is not going to reduce your cost hardly at all, maybe like $100 a quarter. But then we go to our next customer that's not already doing these inspections. They go to the same vendor or a very similar service vendor, and they say, how much is it going to cost to add this to scope? And suddenly the cost is through the roof. Suddenly it's $1,000 a quarter. And so I wanted to just make sure that people understand that removing this from scope, you're going to get a very different price quote from your vendor than adding this to scope if you don't already have this in your service contracts or service agreements. So just be aware of that.
Amrit, in addition, it's a tremendous waste of resources, scarce resources, expensive resources, to have people out sniffing in a store that's leak tight. That's one of the big problems. The resources, it's very difficult to do a good job checking a whole store. If the sniffer tells you there's a problem, well, you got a better chance of finding it promptly. But if the charge is going down, whether it's detected by an Axiom system or anything else, going to that store and looking for that leak could be above the ceiling, could be in pits. It's very onerous. Well, you only want to do that in stores where you're losing refrigerant. It's using a laser to target where your resources are applied instead of a freaking shotgun. So knowing where you need to send your leak identification resources, the few people in your organization, your service organization, who are good at this kind of work, who have the patience and the diligence, who are that kind of individual, then you need to be applying them to best effect. And that's what I call refrigerant loss detection, using a system like Axiom, is so important. Use the resources that are very limited in our industry nowadays, and the people who are interested in and skilled at this, apply them where they need to be applied.
Well put, Tom. Yeah, laser and shotgun. We got our Tom Matthews soundbite too. I'm very excited about that. Yeah, I fully agree. All jokes aside.
It's a violent industry. That's just one of the many shotgun analogies that I've heard used in the supermarket industry. Evidently, in supermarkets, shotguns are always appropriate.
Well, that's because we haven't changed the industry significantly in 40 years. The service industry is still balkanized, very little use of technology, and the training of service techs has degraded from earlier times when the armed forces and union organizations used to have substantial training programs that went on for years, internships and the like. With the trade schools now are just introducing the very basic concepts to the service techs, and then they're thrown into the work environment with very little preparation. So we need to provide technology now that backs their play, that makes their the work they do and their good intentions effective. And this is one way to do it.
Yes, have them focus on the real problems, enable them to succeed a higher percentage of the time during their first visit, rather than spending time on things that aren't as important. In terms of the other things here, the other parts of the business case, avoiding emergency repairs and replacement gas expenses. This is a no-brainer. Don't leak very expensive gas. Avoiding lost sales and alienating shoppers during cooling outages. A really interesting quote that really resonated with me is that, according to a recent survey, 23% of shoppers will go and they will go to a different store if 1 to 3 items on their list are unavailable. So if your freezer aisle is out for 4 hours and 400 shoppers come through, 100 of those folks, according to this survey, are not going to come back next week. Immediate top line impact, immediate bottom line impact. And then finally, the compliance risk, which we've talked about a lot already. And so quickly rocketing through the cost piece, we already are all aware of this, but basically our industry experiences razor thin profits on retail grocery side. Our stores are spending an enormous amount of money just on replacement refrigerant gas. And then we actually went and used the EPA Green Chill milk calculator to look at how many gallons of milk would need to be sold to offset a single leak, assuming 25 dollars per pound for gas and $4 gallon of milk. So that'd be about 98,000 gallons of milk sold to offset the bottom line impact of a single leak. So would you rather sell 100,000 gallons of milk or solve a single leak? Hopefully it's the latter. And I'm going really fast here just so we spend lots of time on questions here. The reason for this slide is I wanted to walk us through some breaking down a business case very simply. This is not rocket science. This is something that you can put together yourself as someone who's in facilities, maintenance, operations, refrigeration, whatever it might be related to these topics of energy maintenance, sustainability, operations, compliance. Or we can help you with it as well. Anyone on the phone can help you with this as well, any of our panelists. So just looking at really simple back of the envelope calculation, if there's 100 stores in your portfolio and it costs you, your service provider quotes you $800 to do a manual leak check. And then you assume that 25% of those sites have systems that have at least 1,500 pounds of gas. The rest of them have systems that are smaller. You're going to save $480,000 by avoiding those manual leak inspections across your 100 stores per year, every single year. And then you start layering on these other pieces. You have those same 100 stores. You're able to detect on average 0.6 leaks early per store per year. This is Axiom's historical average across a portfolio of around 1,000 or 800 facilities that are using this today. And then we're saving about 259 pounds of gas per leak due to early detection, rather than allowing that leak to go to its obvious conclusion of essentially running out of gas and having bubbles in the liquid line going to the display cases and evaporators. 25 bucks a pound. Then you throw in some extra costs for how much is it going to cost in excess technician time and overtime for multiple visits, going back and getting gas, coming in the middle of the night, dealing with demerchandising cases, whatever it might be, the downstream effects of a emergency leak. And then you start looking at the outcomes and impacts of that. We're talking really, really large dollar savings per year just in avoided gas and a little bit of excess technician time as well. And again, we're ignoring lost sales, product loss, and regulatory penalties. And so the reason we put this all together is because we basically wanted to make it clear, look, there is a clear and simple business case that can get your CFO excited about doing something right now in 2025. They're going to thank you for bringing them this business case rather than being annoyed at you for asking them for more money. Like that's not we're not asking our CFOs for more money. We're giving them an opportunity to enhance the financial outcomes of the year of 2025 this year, not next year, this year. And this is ignoring all the soft benefits, which we all know are going to show up: lost sales, product loss, regulatory penalties. We can dramatically help the business in those areas, but we don't even need to use that to underwrite a project like this. Those are not necessary to build the business case. They're just a cherry on top when you're talking to the CFO. So that is the end of our scheduled programming today. We do have a bunch of questions in the Q&A. And the reason I've been rocketing through these is so we can give these questions adequate time. So let's jump into those. Let's see. We have a question from a major retailer about leak inspection requirements. Are quarterly inspections required for 200-pound systems, even if the systems don't leak? Keilly, you want to take this one in terms of New York and then in terms of federal?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that is a little bit puzzling to me, but if you read the regulation, the answer is yes, the quarterly inspections are required even if the systems don't leak. So I've actually got the regulation pulled up here, and it basically says leak inspections must be conducted by the owner operator of the regulated equipment outlined in subdivision A of this section using a calibrated leak detection device or bubble test at the following intervals and under these conditions. And these are ands, okay? So at the frequency outlined in subdivision A, and that's the chart that Amrit showed. I don't know if you want to go to that slide, Amrit, on the schedule for the leak inspections. And when adding additional regulated substance amounts equal to or greater than 5 pounds or 1% of the refrigerant charge capacity, and when oily residue is observed on any refrigerant circuit indicating a refrigerant leak. So unfortunately to me, that means that in any particular quarter, you could wind up having to do 3 leak inspections. What is not clear to me is if you do your regular, let's say you do, for instance, a leak inspection because you have observed oily residue, can that also count as your quarterly in-person inspection? And can that also count as the same inspection, if the oily residue was due to a leak, right? You can read it, the regulation, that theoretically you need to do leak inspections at all of those periods of time. If you do trigger that inspection requirement because you have leaked refrigerant, that's one requirement. If you then see oily residue, you might have to do another one. And do you then on top of that have to do one that is required for the quarter, right? But the regulation clearly says you must do this and this and this. So it's one of the things that is on our list of questions that need to be answered. I would think that if you have oily residue and you have triggered the leak threshold, that can count as your quarterly leak inspection for that particular quarter. Interestingly, they don't have the thing in New York State that says that the quarterly leak inspections have to be, exactly 90 days like in California, or the federal requirement is that they have to be 3 months apart. So what we also don't know is it enough to do a leak inspection in a quarter, or do they have to be at regular intervals a quarter apart, right? Because when you don't specify that, it makes people think that we can do one on March 31st and then we can do one on April the 1st, and we've covered 2 quarters, right?
Good until
Whereas it
September.
makes sense to do them the 3 months apart. So I'm
Good.
sorry, I know that's not the answer that everybody wants to hear, but this is one of the most confusingly written regulations. An awful lot of it just was not written in a way that makes it clear. So like I said, that's part of the 3 pages of questions we have for the state.
Thanks, Keilly. Let's see. What specific reporting proof do they require, or does it say? Is a simple service ticket sufficient? I'm guessing that's related to leak inspections, or maybe when a leak is detected. Keilly, you want to address that one?
So I'm not sure what's meant by reporting proof. So there is going to be the requirement in New York State, like in California and in Washington, that you report all of your service records for your appliances on an annual basis. If what you mean is what is the compliance proof, right? Like what is the proof that you have complied? And I'm not sure if what you're talking about here is the is for the leak inspections, or if you're talking about something else. But your regular compliance records that you keep for the federal government, which you have to keep anyway, for the most part, if you keep a leak inspection record like you do for the federal government, that will meet the New York State requirements too. You probably need to fine tune that. So it's going to be interesting to see what the refrigerant tracking software providers do for the state of New York, right? A lot of, I mean, to me, the beauty, right, is it when you can integrate your leak detection equipment with your tracking software, with your work order management software, right? Ideally, what you want to have is you want to have your leak detection system detecting a leak, an automatic work order go out, and you want the refrigerant compliance record created, right? When you have those three pieces working together, it's going to be a thing of beauty. I haven't seen that yet, especially the automatic triggering of the work order. The number of resources that are wasted at supermarket companies just issuing work orders when they need to be issued, I don't understand why that can't be automated in conjunction with a really good automatic leak detection system, right? You've got to, as these obligations get bigger and bigger and bigger, the answer has got to be to automate more and more and more, or you're just not going to survive it.
Well, Keilly, I just have to say that even the regulations that have been in place for a number of years since the ozone depletion concerns back in the late 80s and early 90s and regulations that went into effect, they're not often completed. The detection of a leak and identification and recording of that are done in a haphazard way. And now in New York State, there'll be additional requirements for those activities. For example, the equipment will need to be labeled, so the history of leaks can be more comprehensive. So I agree completely with you that there needs to be new software. One of the things that we have developed is just when the label goes on, it's got a QR code in it, and the tech just reads that. It takes them right to the forms that they have to fill out regarding that leak, and then that data is all stored digitally. It doesn't address the issue you're talking about of automatic dispatch of the resources and issuing of the work orders, but it takes one step towards making compliance easy, because compliance will only occur if it's easy or if somebody incurs a dramatic fine or other penalty. Keilly, you're too young to realize how old this problem has been in the industry and how poorly we've stepped forward, particularly in the United States. In other parts of the world, the service organizations, operate with ERP systems and other software that tells you where they are and what their skill set is and other things. We don't have that in the US, and we have not had the right incentives to get companies there, and the companies have been too balkanized. So we're faced with addressing a lot of challenges at the same time in order to meet these regulations. And we can't take baby steps because we have to go faster than that. But it will be a stepwise development that hopefully the people in this audience will help steer and do with the minimum resources and the minimum cost to their clients or the companies they work for.
Yeah. In terms of the record keeping and reporting question, talk to your vendor, the folks who were doing your refrigerant tracking or the folks who are doing leak detection, whether it's Axiom or anyone else. That vendor should have the ability to provide the audit and calibration reports on a regular basis. This is very possible with these solutions. And those reports should be available at a click of a button in case you ever get audited from a record standpoint. Also, they should be able to provide the record keeping and reporting reports for individual leaks as well as leak inspections. And so make sure that whichever combination of vendors you're using, you have the ability to pull those up immediately and in case of an audit. And Keilly put on a great session during the last FMI or ATMO conference on what does enforcement readiness look like. This is a really big part of it. We are out of time for today. This was such a compelling and interesting conversation. I really appreciate the contributions of Keilly and Tom. And again, if you do have any questions or you want to learn more or connect with these panelists, please reach out. feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in touch, or reach out directly. We really look forward to continuing the conversation. This is part of a quarterly webinar series, and we're all really committed to helping advance the industry together. So thank you all for what you're doing, and let's do even more together. So thanks all.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank
Have a
you.
good rest of the day.